In the third and final part of our tutorial series on foam rolling, we're going to be going over how to release the soft tissue structures of the anterior, lateral, and posterior thigh, as well as the lower leg. This is the area where people tend to accumulate the most trigger points. There is a lot of muscle tissue in these areas. It's very important that you spend a lot of time doing thorough detective work and trying to audit continually through your foam rolling sessions what tends to be tight and spending a little bit more time on this. Now, what you don't want to do on this foam roller is to hit large swaths of territory, trying to, say, roll the entire thigh at once. You want to work down sequentially in 3 to 4 inch blocks in the legs, scanning side to side across the fibers of the thigh. These muscles run longitudinally from the hip down to the knee, generally speaking. So if you go across the fibers, it'll help you identify what band or tract of muscle tissue is tight and causing some of your issues. So thorough detective work is very important. So we're going to start in the upper portion of the side of the thigh. So with this, you definitely want to have enough room to play around with. You're going to grab your foam roller, and what you want to do to start on the side of the thigh is you first want to avoid the bony part of your hip here. There's a bursa that is immediately around it, and it is generally not very fun to roll over, but this just exists in the side of the hip. So to start here, you want to lay on top of your foam roller, and it's very important that you drop down into your forearm here as to not create a wedge in the lower back. So you want to start generally like this, and then you can take this leg and walk it over the top. This now adds an extra base of support. Your opposite hand and forearm here will add a second and third base of support. So as stated earlier, you want to scan across the fibers of the thigh, trying to audit and identify which structures are actually tight or painful. So you want to think that you're rolling on top of the roller here, scanning around trying to find tight and tender areas. So say I'm scanning through the side of the thigh here, and this is an area where people tend to accumulate a lot of trigger points, is just in the upper and outer portion of the thigh. So say I scan into this area, so now I've identified a place where I need to roll. The most important thing that you can do when rolling legs is totally relax the leg that's on the foam roller. Pretend like it's just dead weight. Shut everything off. Let that foam roller penetrate into the deeper structures of the muscle. What you want to do is slow and controlled movements. A 1 to 2 inch pathway generally is plenty. And as you move down the thigh in 3 to 4 inch blocks, you will find that these trigger points are continuous through some of those blocks. So what I would do here on the upper and outer portion of the thigh, where I've identified one of myself, is just a 1 to 2 inch pathway for 45 seconds to 1 minute. And then I'm going to move on. Again, I'm going to continue rolling forward here, so I'm not quite on the front of the thigh, I'm in the upper and outer portion. For me personally, I like to anchor my elbow into my knee here for a little bit of extra stability. Again, trying to totally relax the leg that you're rolling. Now that we're clear of the bony part of the hip, we can go up a little bit higher toward the pelvis. Try to hit as many tight, tender spots through here as you can find. Now, if you find that that's not enough pressure here, what you can do is actually a tack and floss maneuver. And so what I mean by that is just pinning down a single structure that maybe, say, in the front of the thigh, like we're at currently, pin it down. You don't move relative to the foam roller, but you pull the heel to the butt relative to the foam roller. So what I mean by that is, say I found a spot on the front of the thigh here. What I'll do is I'll pin that structure down, I'll relax the thigh, keeping my back flat, I will pull the heel to the butt. And generally you want to do this about 10 times. Now for some people this is pretty intense. Again, this is a scalable intervention depending on your needs. So I might pull that to the butt 10 times, and I'll go through and clean that 1 to 2 inch area up afterward for an additional 30 seconds. Again, continuing to move onto the front of the thigh, I'll now drop down into an army crawl position here. So again, I'm scanning side to side across the fibers here, trying to identify where the problematic areas are, rolling in a 1 to 2 inch section. So now, what I'll do is I will switch to the inner thigh. What you'll have to do here is actually turn the foam roller sideways. Now this is an area that most people neglect to hit with foam rolling. For women, this is especially important. Because of the wider hip angle, women tend to load the abductor or groin group a little bit more than men do, but men still need to scan through this. So we drop down again in our army crawl stance here, supporting ourselves with our forearms, and we want to make sure that this leg draping over, that the foot is resting on the ground. Again, we want to work in 3 to 4 inch blocks moving down the leg. So in the upper thigh here, what we're working is the high pocket of the groin to approaching mid-thigh here, scanning around, trying to identify tight and tender spots. Again, 45 seconds to a minute, each spot that you find. But you also want to play around with the angle of the thigh here. So I might not find a whole lot here, but if I move that leg up here, this is actually hitting different muscle structures. So what I want to do is be as thorough as humanly possible. Play around, try to identify where things are tight, and go ahead and release those areas. 45 seconds to a minute. So now moving on to the posterior thigh. The territory that we're looking at here is from the bony part of your butt where you sit all the way to the back of your knee. Again, we're going to be moving down sequentially through the thigh, going through this process. So starting in the upper part of the posterior thigh group, this is a really good area to scan cross fiber with. There are a lot of very large muscles back here that tend to accumulate trigger points. So to start out with in a scalable intervention, you don't want to have too much pressure in, especially if your legs are very sensitive. So we want to be rolling from the outside of the hamstring group here to the inside of the hamstring group. And now some people find that this is not enough pressure. And if so, that's okay. What you can do is continue to brace yourself with your hands back here, cross the leg over. So now this adds overpressure into the foam roller. Try to relax the posterior thigh as much as possible when you do this. And as you scan, you are probably better able to identify which areas are tight and tender. So say I've gone through and I found one right here. What I would do is slide my heel across the ground, rolling in a 1 to 2 inch pathway, 45 seconds to a minute. Now if I tripod myself further back, that will put less pressure into the foam roller as my torso being upright would. So play around with the angle and orientation as your needs dictate. Again, scanning cross fibers after I clean that area up. Being sure not to neglect the inner portion of the hamstring here. So notice I'm dropping my knee to the ground. This will help hit a little bit of the adductor group, but as well as the medial hamstrings, going in a 1 to 2 inch pathway. And again, continue to move down the thigh with this. So that concludes everything in the upper portion of the leg. Now the lower portion of the leg works pretty similarly, especially in the calf region. So this is an area too that people often neglect with foam rolling. This is a really great area to go cross fiber with as well. Again, scanning across the fibers of the muscle that runs up and down. So what we want to do here is pin down the calf here. Now you can keep this leg straight if you want to as you're starting. Roll side to side here. This in itself might be enough pressure for you. So if you do find a spot here, then you can go ahead and just slide back and forth. But that might not be enough pressure for some people. So if you find that this is not getting in deep enough for you, what you can do, as in previous, you can cross the leg over, adding a little bit of overpressure into the equation. Now from here, scan side to side, or add even more pressure by lifting your hips off the ground, scanning side to side here. And you can roll back and forth in a 1 to 2 inch pathway. Now some people with shoulder issues might run into trouble here. So what I recommend, if your shoulders are bothering you or you may not have the upper body strength to be able to go back and forth, what you can do is scan side to side, identify where the problematic area is, pin it down, and now your leg doesn't move, you don't move. You lift your hips off the ground, and then this bottom ankle, the leg that you're rolling, you want to roll that ankle in a really big circle. And you want to do this for about 45 seconds to a minute. This will penetrate very deep into the calf fibers. This is another tack and floss drill. So again, moving in blocks down the leg here. This allows you to thoroughly identify where your problem areas are and how to release them. And for our runners, typically people won't develop trigger points in the front of the shin, but we tend to find that runners do. So if you find yourself fatiguing in the shins or you have cramps or any sort of trigger points there, this is a intervention that may be helpful for you. So the tibialis anterior muscle is what pulls the foot up like this. You don't want to roll on the shin bone itself. You want to go to the outside of the shin. You can press into here and feel the meat of the tissue. So what you can do, if you do tend to develop trigger points here, and it's always best practice to scan and make sure that it doesn't exist, is you want to put your shins on the foam roller here. And then cross your ankle over the leg that you're rolling. And now you want to shift your body weight onto the outside of the shin here, keeping your weight centered over that leg. Making sure that the lower leg is totally relaxed and the foot isn't flexed like this. Let that foam roller sink into the anterior shin. Roll back and forth in a 1 to 2 inch pathway for the trigger points that you find. And that concludes our foam rolling tutorial for the thighs and lower leg.